welcome to the deep dive. I am I'm incredibly glad you're joining us today because we have put together something highly specific.
Very specific.
Yeah, deeply analytical and honestly heavily requested by you, our listener. Today's deep dive is tailored specifically for those of you navigating the men's rights activist space.
Right. And men within the red-pilled manosphere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have seen your requests. We completely understand the specific conversations happening in these spaces right now. And today, we are thoroughly analyzing a piece of source material that is just, it's generating a massive amount of discussion online.
It really is. It's everywhere.
It is. But before we really get into the weeds of this, please take a quick second to like and subscribe to the show so we can continue bringing you these extensive breakdowns.
Please do.
So today we are doing a comprehensive cover-to-cover review of a newly released ebook. It is called Marriage Trap: How Men Are Enslaved by Divorce Laws and Female Strategy by Conrad Riker.
Copyright 2025.
Copyright 2025, exactly. It introduces a premise that it basically aims to completely shift the paradigm of how we view modern relationships. It argues that it exposes the hidden rules and the institutional biases that dictate the modern dating and marriage marketplace.
The whole system.
Right. And if you want to dive into the source material yourself, and you really should, I highly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the book.
Absolutely.
And make sure to go follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack, because we have a mountain of material to get through today.
We certainly do. I mean, the scope of this book is just vast.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to thoroughly dissect the biological, psychological, and historical arguments that Conrad Riker presents. He essentially frames this text as a survival manual for the modern man.
A survival manual.
Right. But before we begin mapping out his arguments, it is absolutely essential that I state a crucial disclaimer for you, the listener.
Very important.
Because this source material contains highly politically charged content that directly addresses feminism, institutional capture, and shifting gender dynamics, we, as your hosts, are not taking any sides.
None at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, whether left-wing or right-wing, presented in this content. Our sole job today is to impartially report on the ideas contained in the original source material.
Just giving you the facts of the book.
Exactly. To break down the author's argument structurally, so you can understand exactly what is being claimed.
That is exactly our role. We are your expert guides through the architecture of these arguments. And the core premise Riker builds upon relies really heavily on the matrix metaphor.
The red pill, blue pill concept.
Right. He argues that modern men are operating within a blue pill matrix of societal illusions. It's this socially engineered fairy tale about egalitarian partnerships, unconditional love, and mutual sacrifice.
The Disney version.
The Disney version, exactly. His overarching thesis is that stripping away this romanticized narrative and returning to a cold, strictly biological understanding of gender dynamics is literally the only way a man can protect himself today.
It is a fundamentally utilitarian view of human interaction, and the author traces the history of human institutions, from ancient Rome all the way through medieval Europe.
Which we'll get into.
Oh yeah, leading right up to what he describes as their modern capture by ideological movements.
Right.
We are going to examine how the book claims these institutions shifted, how the legal and financial liabilities were fundamentally altered, and perhaps most importantly, how biological imperatives dictate human behavior far more than modern social conditioning wants to admit.
So let's start right where the book starts, which is evolutionary biology. Riker introduces this concept of the dual mating strategy.
This is foundational.
It is. He argues that women are biologically hardwired by millions of years of evolution to play a two-pronged game when it comes to mate selection. On one hand, there is this subconscious drive to seek out alpha genes. This means physical attractiveness, assertiveness, dominance.
Particularly during periods of high fertility.
Exactly, to secure the most robust genetic material for potential offspring. But simultaneously, there is an equally powerful drive to secure a beta provider.
A completely different archetype.
Right. A man who demonstrates stability, reliability, and the willingness to channel his resources into providing for her and her children long term.
And the way Riker frames this is critical for you to understand. He does not present this duality as a conscious, malicious plot formulated by women to deceive men.
It's not a conspiracy.
No. He frames it as a primal evolutionary survival tactic. In ancestral environments, a woman's survival and the survival of her offspring literally depended on her ability to secure both strong genetics to ensure the child was resilient and reliable resources to ensure the child didn't starve.
It's just biology.
Right. The book's central biological argument is that while our society has rapidly evolved into an era of grocery stores and climate control,
Mm,
our core neurological wiring has not changed at all.
not one bit.
So the modern man often finds himself unknowingly slotted strictly into the beta provider role. He assumes he is fulfilling the entirety of the relationship's requirements by paying the mortgage and being loyal,
He thinks he's doing everything right.
entirely unaware that he is fulfilling only half of this biological imperative.
And to make this abstract evolutionary theory tangible, Riker pulls in some high-profile celebrity examples, which I thought was a really effective way to illustrate the point.
Very effective.
He points to the highly publicized split between Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt and her subsequent relationship with Justin Theroux.
Right.
The book frames Pitt at that specific time in their lives as the established, safer bet, whereas Theroux is analyzed as representing the more edgy, unpredictable alpha archetype that satisfied a completely different biological drive.
It's a shift in priority.
Yeah, but the author goes further when looking at the resource side of the equation. He brings up Tiger Woods and his ex-wife, Ellen Nordegren.
A massive case study.
When that massive scandal broke, she walked away with a reported $100 million settlement. Riker essentially asks the reader to look past the tabloid narrative of a wronged spouse and analyze the mechanics of the outcome.
The actual result.
Right. He poses the question, was the driving force behind that massive financial extraction about a broken heart? Or was it the primal maternal instinct kicking into overdrive to secure maximum resources for her survival and her children's survival?
And he uses those cultural touchstones very deliberately to demonstrate that these underlying biological rules remain constant, regardless of a person's immense wealth or social status.
It happens to billionaires, too.
Exactly. He is trying to show the reader that if this dynamic can play out against international celebrities who have access to the best legal teams on earth, the average man working a standard job is entirely unprotected if he doesn't understand the rules.
Completely exposed.
This analysis of resource extraction brings us directly to the concept of hypergamy, which is arguably the bedrock of the entire book.
Yeah, let's get into hypergamy.
Hypergamy, as Riker defines it, is the innate, deeply ingrained female drive to seek partners of higher status, greater wealth, or superior physical stature.
It's the drive to trade up.
It is the biological instinct to continuously trade up, yes.
And he anchors this heavily in data. He isn't just throwing out internet forum theories here. Riker cites a specific 2019 study published in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior.
The 87% stat.
Yeah, the data point he highlights is that a staggering 87% of women prefer men who earn more than they do. The book uses this study to argue that hypergamy is a scientifically observable reality.
It's hardwired.
Fundamentally hardwired into human preference, completely contradicting the modern narrative that women simply want an equal 50-50 financial partner.
The author emphasizes that this programming the drive to secure the best possible material resources does not have an off switch.
It never stops running.
Never. In the modern era, physical protection from predators has been replaced by the need for financial and social status. Furthermore, he argues that this hypergamous drive doesn't simply disappear once a woman signs a marriage certificate.
Right.
If her own status rises, her internal biological standard for an acceptable mate rises commensurately.
And I want to drill down into the mechanics of that because he uses a very specific anecdote to illustrate this upward mobility. He shares the story of Sarah, a 32-year-old marketing executive.
I remember this one.
Yeah, according to the book, Sarah married her college sweetheart, who was a high school teacher back when she was 25.
So they were peers at the time.
Exactly, they were socioeconomic peers. But over the next 7 years, Sarah climbs the corporate ladder, she hits a six-figure salary, her social circle shifts to other high-earning executives, and her lifestyle expectations change.
Naturally.
And by the time she is 32, she divorces the school teacher. Riker's analysis of this is fascinating. He argues she didn't leave him because he suddenly became abusive or unfaithful. She left because she outgrew him. Her hypergamous instinct demanded a partner who could match or elevate her newly acquired status. The school teacher, despite his loyalty and stability, simply no longer met the biological criteria of being a superior provider.
And the author connects this modern corporate anecdote directly to historical precedents. He points out that historically, hypergamy shaped the very foundation of how societies were structured.
Look at the royals.
Exactly. If we look at royal marriages throughout European history, they were rarely, if ever, predicated on romantic love.
Never.
They were calculated, strategic alliances designed to secure power, consolidate land, and monopolize resources. Queens married kings to elevate or protect their status.
It was a business transaction.
The book argues that the underlying game hasn't changed at all. Only the players and the specific currency of the playing fields have shifted. Today, women aren't trading for castles or political alliances. They are trading for lifestyle optimization, social capital on platforms like Instagram, and ultimate financial security.
And the technology aspect of this is terrifying if you follow his logic. Riker talks about how modern dating apps, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, along with social media, have essentially turbocharged this hypergamous instinct.
It's an infinite catalog.
Right. Historically, a person's dating pool was geographically limited to their local town or immediate social circle. You compared your mate to the other people in your village.
You settled for the best available option locally.
Exactly. Now, because of these platforms, women have instant access to an endless globalized pool of potential mates. Raker points out that dating apps literally allow users to algorithmically filter men by income brackets, educational degrees, and exact height requirements.
That's 6-foot rule.
Yeah. The book frames this not as modern romance, but as a hyper-efficient marketplace explicitly designed to cater to hypergamous criteria.
Which naturally leads to a critical question the author addresses.
Yeah.
If this hypergamous instinct is a constant background process, how does the book explain the mechanics of a woman who was already married deciding to execute that instinct?
How does she actually make the jump?
Exactly. Does it just happen overnight? Riker argues it absolutely does not. He introduces the concept of monkey branching.
Monkey branching.
The metaphor is visceral. Drawing on primate behavior, a monkey will not let go of one branch until it has a firm, secure grip on the next one.
That makes perfect sense.
Applied to human relationships, it is the practice of a woman securing a new partner, or at the very least, securing the emotional and logistical commitment of a new partner before she physically or legally initiates the dissolution of her current relationship.
It is described as the ultimate emotional insurance policy. And the book uses the timeline of the Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott divorce to illustrate how this plays out at the highest levels.
The timing was very interesting there.
Very. While the public relations narrative at the time focused on an amicable mutual split, Riker analyzes the timeline to suggest that the emotional detachment and the strategic realignment of her life almost certainly happened long before the lawyers drafted the public statements.
It's all done in the background.
The book claims that in the vast majority of these cases, the woman has already mourned the relationship, moved on emotionally, and mentally constructed her post-divorce reality before the man is even aware there is a fatal problem in marriage.
The author labels this the emotional detachment trap. He frames it as a subconscious psychological survival mechanism.
To protect herself.
Yes. The woman begins to pull away to insulate herself from the impending fallout of the breakup. Behaviorally, this manifests as her becoming highly critical, emotionally distant, and initiating arguments over seemingly trivial domestic issues.
The book references the dynamic in the movie The Breakup with Jennifer Aniston.
A perfect cinematic example.
Right, to show how this is portrayed, often humorously, in popular culture, the sudden, inexplicable coldness, the total withdrawal of physical intimacy.
And the man is left utterly confused, desperately trying to apply logical fixes to a relationship that his partner has internally already abandoned.
It is portrayed as a brutal, disorienting awakening for the men going through it. And Riker issues a massive warning to the reader about what he calls stepping stone syndrome.
This is a harsh concept.
It is. This is a scenario where the man is not viewed as a final destination, but merely as a bridge. He is a placeholder, utilized to provide financial stability, housing, or emotional support, while she actively scouts the marketplace for the hypergamous upgrade.
While holding onto his branch.
Exactly. Once that upgrade is firmly secured, once she has a grip on the next branch, the stepping stone is discarded. The book is incredibly blunt here, insisting that men must view relationships through this utilitarian lens in order to recognize when they are being used as a placeholder.
And if we establish that this biological drive is constantly running in the background, the natural follow-up is to ask how a woman actually gauges if her current partner is still her best option. How does she measure his resilience over time?
The testing phase.
Riker argues this happens through constant microscopic behavioral audits. He spends significant time analyzing how women subconsciously test men to ensure they still possess the psychological strength necessary to be a reliable protector.
Right.
In the lexicon of this space, these are referred to as shit tests.
Now, since our audience is largely familiar with the manosphere, the concept of a shit test isn't new to you listening. But what is really interesting is how Riker categorizes them.
He takes it a step further.
He does. He doesn't just view them as annoying relationship hurdles, he views them as critical, high stakes gauges of a man's frame. He uses the classic, almost cliche example the partner asking, "Do I look fat in this dress?"
It is a phenomenal example because it is the ultimate trap for the unprepared, logical man.
The logical trap.
The book explains that when she asks that question, she is not actually seeking a factual, objective assessment of her body mass index or the tailoring of the garment.
Obviously not.
She is actively testing your reaction to emotional pressure. If you panic, stammer, attempt to logically explain why the dress isn't flattering, or become defensive about being asked a trick question, you have fundamentally failed the test.
You cracked.
You have demonstrated that your emotional equilibrium can be easily disrupted by her anxiety or her shifting moods.
And Riker provides the exact blueprint for how to pass this audit. He advises that the only correct response is one rooted in humor and unshakable confidence.
You hold your frame.
You don't engage with the premise of the question. You look at her, smirk, and say something like, "You look amazing, but honestly, I'd look better in that dress."
Let's break down the psychological mechanics of why the author claims that specific response works. First, it utilizes humor to instantly diffuse the manufactured tension.
All right.
But more importantly, it demonstrates that the man's emotional state, his frame, is entirely independent of her anxiety. The concept of frame is paramount in Riker's philosophy.
It's everything.
It represents a man's personal reality, his established boundaries, and his internal self-assurance. If you lose your frame by getting defensive, apologizing unnecessarily, or over-explaining yourself, you signal weakness.
You lose her respect.
And the book states unequivocally, as a foundational rule, that without respect, biological attraction cannot exist.
But the book also warns that if a man constantly fails these micro tests, the behavior can escalate into something much darker and more systematic, which Riker terms emotional terrorism.
This is where it gets dangerous.
He distinguishes this from simple testing. Emotional terrorism is described as the weaponization of guilt, weaponized tears, prolonged silent treatments, and public shaming designed explicitly to control a man's behavior and isolate him.
He shares a very heavy anecdote about a guy named John here.
Yeah, John is working 60-hour weeks in a demanding career, absorbing immense stress to provide a high standard of living for his family. Yet he comes home to a daily minefield of passive-aggressive emotional warfare.
Every single day.
His wife utilizes crying to win any logical disagreement. She constantly accuses him of being emotionally unavailable despite his workload and uses the silent treatment to punish him for minor infractions. Over time, John is completely hollowed out, genuinely believing that he is the sole problem in the marriage.
The author connects this microdynamic to a macro-societal issue. Riker argues that modern society, specifically influenced by modern feminism, has normalized and even codified this type of emotional abuse by rebranding it as female empowerment.
We celebrate it.
The book claims that society enthusiastically praises women for being strong, independent girl bosses in the corporate world, but simultaneously grants them the license to play the fragile, oppressed victim within their interpersonal relationships whenever it serves their strategic interests.
He points to prevalent pop culture archetypes to demonstrate how deeply this normalization runs. He specifically calls out beloved cultural icons like Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl and Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City. These are characters who routinely utilize extreme emotional manipulation, game playing, toxic jealousy, and guilt trips to manipulate the men around them.
Constantly.
Yet the media framing presents this behavior as quirky, endearing, or a sign of a fiercely independent woman. Riker argues this media conditioning trains generations of women that emotional terrorism is not only a valid tactic, but a socially celebrated one.
Which leads the author to define the drama trap. Women, driven by this biological imperative to continuously stress test a man's emotional resilience, will consciously or subconsciously manufacture conflict out of thin air.
Just to see what he does.
Exactly. The trap for the man is believing the conflict is about the actual subject being argued over and subsequently engaging with it logically.
Which is a mistake.
A huge mistake. The book advises that staying in the conversational war zone and attempting to logically debate your way out of manufactured emotionally driven drama will inevitably destroy your mental health.
You can't logic your way out of it.
The only winning move, according to Riker's framework, is refusing to engage, setting an immovable boundary, and physically walking away from the chaos to protect your own psychological frame.
It sounds incredibly exhausting to constantly navigate, and it sets up what I found to be one of the most profound and frustrating concepts in the entire book: the double bind of masculinity.
The impossible standard.
Riker outlines an impossible, completely contradictory set of societal expectations that modern men are trapped within. On one hand, traditional societal and biological expectations demand that a man be an aggressive, stoic protector, a high-earning provider, and a decisive leader.
The traditional role.
But the second a man actually displays those dominant traits, modern culture immediately labels him toxic or patriarchal. On the other hand, modern therapy speak and media demand that men be vulnerable, sensitive, and emotionally transparent.
The modern role.
But the author argues that the moment a man actually cries or shows genuine weakness to his female partner, she instantly loses attraction to him, labeling him beta or emotionally burdensome.
This paradox raises a critical question about the psychological toll this takes on the modern male psyche. The author argues that this conflicting set of demands leaves men in a state of perpetual, paralyzing self-doubt.
You can't win.
They are forced to walk on eggshells, constantly attempting to calibrate their behavior to simultaneously please modern societal edicts and satisfy their partner's underlying biological drives. But they fail, because the standards are mutually exclusive.
You cannot be a stoic rock and a weeping poet simultaneously.
As Riker eloquently summarizes the dilemma, a man cannot be both a lion and a lamb at the same time. The attempt to embody both simply breaks the man's spirit.
And this interpersonal dynamic naturally scales up. Riker argues you cannot fully understand the micro-interactions of a marriage without understanding the macro environment of the institutions governing it.
This is where we get into the history.
Yeah, this brings us to a massive historical deep dive the book takes, exploring what Riker provocatively calls the marriage plantation.
The historical context provided in this section is vital for understanding the author's overarching thesis regarding institutional capture. He argues that historically, while legal and social systems were undeniably harsh and brutal, they possessed a certain legal honesty regarding power dynamics.
They didn't lie about what it was.
And, crucially, they were honest about the liabilities that men exclusively shouldered. He begins this historical trace with ancient Roman law and the concept of the paterfamilias.
Right, the head of the household.
Under this system, the oldest living male was the head of the household and held ultimate, unquestioned legal authority over his wife, children, and property. However, modern critiques often omit the flip side of that authority. He also held ultimate, absolute financial liability.
That's the key.
If his wife accrued massive debt, or if his children committed a crime or damaged property, the paterfamilias paid the price. His personal wealth and freedom were constantly on the line for the actions of his dependents. Authority was directly tethered to liability.
He then moves forward to 19th century English curvature laws, which is a really fascinating legal study.
Very revealing.
Under the doctrine of feme covert, a woman's legal identity literally merged with her husband's upon marriage. She could not own property, sign contracts, or sue in her own name.
Right.
Now, modern history classes frame this entirely through the lens of female oppression, treating women as mere property. But Riker flips the lens to examine the liability aspect.
Because she had no separate legal identity, the man was held entirely legally responsible for her conduct.
Right. If she racked up exorbitant debts, the authorities didn't arrest her, they sent the husband to debtor's prison. Riker argues that the authority the man had was a necessary legal counterbalance to the immense risk he assumed by marrying her.
The book also examines the economics of medieval European dowries. The common modern misconception is that a dowry was essentially a financial windfall.
Like a bribe to the groom.
Exactly, a bribe paid to the groom to take a daughter off a family's hands. The author clarifies the actual historical mechanics, revealing that the dowry was frequently a massive financial burden and a source of extreme liability for the groom.
How so?
The groom was legally and socially expected to utilize that money to maintain a specific standard of living for his new wife. More importantly, if the marriage failed or he was deemed to have mismanaged the funds, he was often legally required to return the entirety of the dowry to her family's estate.
Wow.
If he had spent it on their living expenses, he faced total financial ruin.
So, synthesizing all of this historical data, Riker argues that these ancient systems, as draconian as they appear to modern sensibilities, did not insult anyone's intelligence by pretending to be equal partnerships.
They were transparent.
They explicitly legally recognized that men bore the ultimate burden of responsibility, risk, and liability, and granted them authority commensurate with that risk.
And Riker vigorously contrasts this historical reality with today's society. He argues that the modern system maintains the socially pleasing illusion of an equal 50-50 partnership, while silently and systematically shifting all of the legal, financial, and social risks entirely onto the man's shoulders.
While stripping him of any corresponding authority.
Precisely.
And the specific turning point for this massive societal shift, according to the book's timeline, occurred in the 1970s. The author identifies the cultural upheaval of the sexual revolution in the 1960s, culminating in the introduction of no-fault divorce laws in California in 1969.
Which then swept the nation in the 70s.
Yeah, he views this as the catastrophic pivot point for men. Prior to this, divorce required proving fault adultery, abandonment, extreme cruelty. No-fault divorce radically altered the contract.
It destroys the contract.
It meant that a woman could unilaterally terminate a marriage for any reason or no reason at all without needing to prove any wrongdoing by the husband and still be legally entitled to a massive division of his accumulated assets and future income.
Riker refers to this legislative shift as the beginning of the rise of female supremacy and the definitive moment when institutions were captured by feminist ideologies.
And the statistics he presents to back up the realities of the current system are genuinely staggering.
They're grim.
He states that today, women initiate approximately 70% of all divorces.
80%.
And if the marriage involves college-educated couples, that number jumps even higher. In the family court system, women win primary physical custody of children over 90% of the time.
90%.
And culturally, due to longevity, divorce settlements, and wealth transfer, women now control over 60% of all personal wealth in the United States.
The author is highly focused on framing the absolute financial devastation that modern divorce inflicts on men. He cites economic data suggesting that, on average, a man's standard of living drops precipitously, losing roughly 42% of his net worth in a divorce proceeding.
Almost half.
Conversely, he cites studies showing that women often experience a substantial gain, sometimes up to a 73% increase in their net worth or overall financial standing post-divorce, when factoring in the division of the man's assets, alimony, and child support.
The wealth transfer is insane.
The author's inescapable conclusion is that the current legal system financially incentivizes women to break their marital vows.
He brings these statistics to life with some truly brutal, real-world anecdotes that I know will resonate with many guys listening. He details the case of a blue-collar plumber.
This one was tough to read.
It was. This guy works physically demanding labor, destroying his knees and back, and he is legally mandated by a judge to pay $3,000 a month in permanent alimony to his ex-wife,
Who was a lawyer.
who is currently practicing as a highly successful, high-earning corporate lawyer. The court ordered it simply to maintain the lifestyle she became accustomed to during the marriage.
It defies logic.
Then he shares the story of Mike, who is court-ordered to pay $2,000 a month in child support to his ex-wife. The kicker: his ex-wife actually earns a significantly higher base salary than Mike does.
But the court system still defaults to the mother.
Right. Because the family court system reflexively defaulted to giving the mother primary physical custody, Mike is forced to subsidize her already superior income. Riker doesn't mince words. He explicitly calls this systemic legalized theft.
Expanding on this, the author argues that this extreme bias is not isolated to the confines of family court. He posits that it represents a total overarching institutional capture across all facets of society. He looks at the media and entertainment industry as a primary ideological battleground.
We discussed the behavioral tropes earlier with Gossip Girl.
Right, but Riker points to the deliberate destruction of the competent male archetype in media as a whole. He points to characters like Phil Dunphy in Modern Family or Homer Simpson.
The bumbling dad.
The lovable, well-meaning, but fundamentally incompetent, bumbling male who constantly needs to be saved or corrected by his hyper-competent, exasperated wife.
It's every sitcom.
He contrasts this systemic degradation of men with the rise of flawless, overpowered female heroes, citing Rey in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, who effortlessly outclasses seasoned Jedi Masters with zero training or struggle.
A total Mary Sue.
The book argues this is not just lazy writing. It is deliberate, sustained cultural conditioning designed to subconsciously devalue men and elevate women.
And he tracks how this ideology has permeated education and the corporate workplace. Riker points out the incredibly alarming statistic that men are vanishing from higher education, now making up only 40% of college graduates.
A massive drop.
He attributes this mass exodus not to a lack of male intelligence, but to an education system that has been systematically feminized from elementary school onward, punishing boisterous male behavior.
Drugging young boys for acting like boys.
Exactly. And the proliferation of university programs that explicitly demonize traditional masculinity as inherently toxic. In the corporate sector, he argues that the aggressive implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas has completely overridden meritocracy.
DEI is everywhere now.
He claims highly qualified, experienced men are routinely passed over for promotions or hiring simply so corporations can meet arbitrary gender targets set by HR departments.
The book also rigorously examines government policies and legislation, noting how laws consistently and heavily favor female-centric needs and perspectives. Riker highlights the massive corporate and governmental push for extended maternity leave, while paternity leave is frequently treated as an afterthought or actively discouraged.
Or shamed.
He dives into the systemic bias in the application of domestic violence laws, arguing that the Duluth model essentially trains law enforcement to automatically assume the male is the primary aggressor in any domestic dispute,
Regardless of what actually happened.
regardless of the physical evidence or who initiated the conflict. The author even broadens his scope to touch upon global religion, analyzing how historically major faiths like Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism have provided rigid, structured scripts for gender roles that gave men purpose and authority.
A framework.
He notes how the modern, aggressive secular shift is actively dismantling these traditional scripts globally, leaving men completely unmoored from their historical purpose and societal value.
This brings us to a chapter where Riker essentially takes a sledgehammer to the very concept of modern egalitarianism. Chapter 7 is dedicated to dismantling the myth of gender equality.
He pulls no punches here.
He really doesn't. He argues that the entire modern social justice project, striving for absolute equality of outcome between the sexes, is not just legally flawed, but biologically impossible. He argues that social engineering and government mandates are fighting a losing battle against fundamental human DNA.
This is a core pillar of the author's philosophical framework. He utilizes stark occupational data to highlight these inescapable biological realities. He notes the indisputable statistic that over 95% of all workplace fatalities are men.
95%.
These are the men maintaining the physical infrastructure of civilization, working on offshore oil rigs, deep in coal mines, in high-rise commercial construction, logging, and commercial fishing.
The dangerous jobs.
The book argues forcefully that men utterly dominate these dangerous, physically brutal fields, not because of some insidious patriarchal conspiracy designed to keep women out of the logging industry, but because men are biologically built through testosterone and evolutionary pressure for extreme physical stress, high-risk tolerance, and spatial problem solving.
While women gravitate towards other roles.
Conversely, he argues that women naturally gravitate toward roles centered around nurturing, caregiving, and highly verbal communication.
Based on this, Riker argues that the modern political push for artificial 50-50 gender quotas in fields that require extreme physical dominance or high-stakes risk tolerance is not just ideological madness, it is actively dangerous.
He specifically points his critique at the military.
Yeah, he argues that the political pressure to lower physical fitness standards in order to artificially push women into frontline combat roles like the infantry or special forces, directly compromises unit effectiveness.
It degrades physical readiness.
And ultimately puts human lives at risk simply to appease the political narratives of feminist activists who will never see a battlefield.
Which raises an incredibly important question that the author forces the reader to confront. What is the actual, tangible societal cost of ignoring these deep-seated biological realities?
What happens when we pretend biology isn't real?
The author argues the cost is already proving to be catastrophic. By legally and culturally pushing women to prioritize corporate career advancement over family formation, and simultaneously bombarding men with the message that their natural protective and dominant instincts are toxic, society has triggered a massive, unprecedented decline in marriage rates.
And the direct consequence of that decline is the absolute explosion in single motherhood. Riker doesn't just make a moral argument here.
He brings the stats.
He cites well-documented sociological statistics showing that children raised in single-parent homes, which are overwhelmingly fatherless homes, face staggeringly higher risks across every negative metric.
Every single one.
They have higher rates of behavioral issues, lower academic performance, higher rates of teenage pregnancy, and are vastly more likely to end up incarcerated in the criminal justice system.
He argues that fathers provide a specific biologically necessary type of structure, boundary enforcement, and discipline that simply cannot be socially engineered away or replaced by government programs.
This systemic failure brings us to the tragic reality of what the author terms the beta trap.
This is crucial for the listener to understand.
When men internalize the relentless cultural message that their traditional masculine traits are toxic, oppressive, and unwanted, they attempt to adapt. They suppress their nature and try to become the nice guy that modern media tells them women want.
And it backfires completely.
The author paints a vivid, depressing portrait using the example of John, a mid-level software engineer.
Poor John.
Let's look at John's life. He works 60 hours a week to provide a comfortable suburban life. He comes home exhausted, but immediately starts cooking dinner. He constantly apologizes for his mere existence,
Walking on eggshells.
defers every minor decision to his wife to avoid conflict, and ultimately gets viciously berated by her because he bought the wrong brand of almond milk at the grocery store.
It is a pathetic, soul-crushing image, but one that is incredibly common.
It's everywhere.
And Riker's analysis of John is absolutely ruthless. He says John genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. John thinks he is being a good, modern, progressive partner.
But Riker argues John is actually a martyr who has engineered his own misery.
By completely abandoning his masculine frame, refusing to set boundaries, and attempting to appease his wife's every irrational emotional demand, he entirely loses her respect.
And as the book established as a foundational law, without respect, there is zero attraction.
John ends up being financially exploited as a walking ATM, emotionally drained by constant appeasement, and completely sexually neglected by a wife who feels no visceral attraction to him.
The author warns that this beta male archetype is not a natural state.
No, it is a direct product of modern societal conditioning, and have been systematically taught to suppress their natural instincts to lead, protect, and assert boundaries.
But Riker argues that millions of years of biology cannot be fooled by a few decades of sociology.
The wife in the almond milk scenario may consciously demand a submissive, easily controlled husband, but her deep-seated hypergamous instincts will absolutely despise him for actually submitting to her.
She resents him for doing what she told him to do.
Exactly. Her biology demands strength, and when she senses weakness, it eventually leads her to seek out an alpha male who does not apologize for his masculinity, either through infidelity or divorce.
That terrifying reality is exactly why the book transitions into the solution phase. We are moving into the core of the survival manual, the process of waking up, taking the red pill, and embracing what Riker calls the alpha blueprint.
This is the actionable part of the book.
For our listener, the Matrix metaphor of the red and blue pill is standard terminology, but Riker applies it with devastating precision directly to the mechanics of marriage, dating, and family law.
The blue pill represents the comfortable, socially accepted, Disney-fied lie.
It's the belief that love conquers all, that the family court system is fair and just, that your wife loves you unconditionally for who you are, and that if you are just a nice guy who plays by the rules, you'll be rewarded with lifelong loyalty and happiness.
The process of rejecting that blue pill is what the author outlines next, and he explores the psychological trauma of taking the red pill.
It's not easy.
He makes it clear that this is not an easy or pleasant transition. It is described as a deeply traumatic awakening, a shattering of a man's fundamental worldview.
He breaks this process down into 4 distinct psychological stages. The first stage is shock.
The inciting incident.
It is the moment a man is utterly blindsided by divorce papers he didn't see coming, or the moment he discovers undeniable evidence that his wife has been actively monkey branching. It is the jarring realization that the rules he played by his entire life were a complete fabrication.
The second stage is anger, and this is a massive focal point in the book. This is the phase where the man realizes the entire system is rigged against him. He realizes the media lied to him about what women want, the legal system views him solely as a utility, and his ex-partner actively manipulated his trust.
And Riker issues a massive flashing warning to the reader right here. He says that getting permanently stuck in the anger phase is a fatal trap.
Fatal. If a man stays here, it leads to toxic bitterness, absolute resentment, and a paralyzing misogyny where he simply blames all women for his lack of success.
The book is incredibly explicit on this point. The goal of the red pill is not to hate women.
Women are simply acting on their biological imperatives.
Exactly. The goal is to understand the cold, mechanical rules of the game so you can stop being a victim and stop losing.
That is a crucial distinction the author makes, which leads directly to the third stage, acceptance.
In this phase, the man stops raging against the biological and legal realities of the world. He stops wishing for a Disney romance.
He accepts that hypergamy is real.
He accepts the intense bias in the family courts, and he realizes that complaining won't change the system. He accepts that he must adapt his strategy to survive in the environment as it actually exists.
This radical acceptance opens the door to the fourth and final stage, transformation.
This is where the man takes absolute, uncompromising ownership of his life, stops seeking external validation from women or society, and focuses entirely on internal self-improvement and building his own value.
This transformation stage is where Riker introduces his alpha blueprint. Now, he takes time to clarify a common misconception.
He argues that being a true alpha in the modern world is not about being a loud, aggressive, chest-beating bully who disrespects people.
Not at all. He compares the true alpha mindset to the psychology of a Navy SEAL.
It is about possessing extreme competence, maintaining total emotional control, and being absolutely reliable under extreme pressure.
It's about being the man who doesn't panic, scream, or lose his frame when the ship starts taking on water.
To further illustrate this blueprint, the author references pop culture, specifically pointing to the character Harvey Specter from the television show Suits.
When Riker brings up the dark triad of personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, he's not suggesting a man should become a clinical sociopath.
He's talking about the strategic microdosing of these traits.
Spectre embodies this balance perfectly. He is fiercely assertive, unapologetically ambitious, and capable of being ruthless when protecting his interests. These are the Machiavellian elements.
But he balances those traits with exceptionally high emotional intelligence, extreme professional competence, and a code of loyalty.
He is not a tyrant who abuses his subordinates, but he absolutely, unequivocally controls his frame in every interaction. He commands respect through competence and boundary enforcement.
And the most critical element of this alpha blueprint is laid out in Chapter 18, the importance of a mission. Riker states unequivocally that women do not want a man whose entire existence revolves around them.
A man who makes a woman the center of his universe becomes suffocating and ultimately pathetic in her eyes.
Women want a man who is driven by a profound, overarching purpose. He uses Elon Musk as the ultimate, extreme example of this principle.
Musk is notoriously eccentric, he can be highly awkward in interviews, and his personal life is admittedly chaotic.
Yet women of incredibly high status are intensely drawn to him. Why? Riker argues it has nothing to do with his looks or his charm.
It is because his mission, advancing human civilization, colonizing Mars, revolutionizing transportation, signals an unparalleled, almost obsessive level of drive, resourcefulness, and ambition.
His mission is so massive that it makes him the ultimate prize in the hypergamous marketplace.
To help the average man achieve a state of high value, the book provides a specific set of practical, non-negotiable survival tools. First and foremost is absolute physical fitness.
You have to hit the gym.
The author argues that a man must build a strong, capable physical body because physical discipline translates directly into mental clarity, higher testosterone, and the physical presence required to command respect.
Second is mental discipline and emotional independence.
Specifically, mastering the ability to remain completely non-reactive to the shit tests and emotional terrorism we discussed earlier. A man must find his validation internally, not from his partner's approval.
And finally, he covers the absolute legal necessities for any man operating in this system. Riker is dead serious here. If you are going to participate in the modern institution of marriage, you must understand you are willingly stepping into a legal minefield heavily rigged against you.
He acknowledges that demanding a prenuptial agreement is not romantic. It kills the Disney fantasy.
But he argues that losing 50% of your life's work, your retirement, and access to your children is infinitely less romantic.
He presents airtight, aggressively negotiated prenups, and the maintenance of completely separate bank accounts as absolute, non-negotiable requirements for any man even considering marriage today. Without them, you are volunteering for slaughter.
This pragmatic approach to survival brings us to the final major theme of the book, which deals with brotherhood, mentorship, and the path forward. The author emphasizes that men are, fundamentally and biologically speaking, pack animals.
For millennia, men thrived in tribal groups, hunting, building infrastructure, and protecting the perimeter together.
But modern society, characterized by the isolated nuclear family structure, combined with atomizing technology and exhausting corporate work hours, has deeply and deliberately isolated men from one another.
I think anyone listening to this knows exactly what he's talking about.
Guys get married, they gradually drop their single friends to appease their wives, and then 10 years later, when the marriage abruptly blows up, they look around and realize they have absolutely no one to rely on.
They have no tribe.
Riker argues that finding a tribe of like-minded men is not a hobby, it is a matter of psychological life and death. He talks extensively about the power of the Red Pill community, both in its online iterations and in physical reality.
He points to online forums, like Reddit's The Red Pill or various dedicated message boards, as crucial initial staging grounds.
These are spaces where men can experience that initial shock of awakening, share their stories, and realize that their individual suffering is actually part of a massive systemic pattern.
They realize they aren't crazy, and more importantly, they aren't alone.
The psychological concept the author explores here is post-traumatic growth. He pushes back against the narrative that a devastating divorce is the end of a man's life.
He cites data indicating that up to 70% of men who hit absolute rock bottom, men who lose their families, are evicted from their homes and see their wealth wiped out in family court, can eventually emerge from that trauma significantly stronger, wiser, and more emotionally resilient.
However, he heavily caveats this. This growth only occurs if they have the right support system and the right analytical framework to process the trauma.
He highlights physical offline meetups as particularly powerful mechanisms for this. He describes intensely practical scenes of men gathering not to complain, but to literally dissect a brother's divorce papers, analyzing legal precedents, and pooling their collective intelligence to find legal loopholes and strategic advantages.
The author frames this as the modern legal equivalent of a tribal hunting party men combining their strength to defeat a massive threat.
But Riker is also highly critical of his own space, warning the listener about the severe double-edged sword of online communities.
He acknowledges how incredibly easy it is for these online forums to devolve into toxic echo chambers of despair.
These are spaces where guys who are stuck in the anger phase simply sit around validating each other's victimhood, sharing outrage porn, and blaming women for every failure in their lives.
He calls that a pathetic trap. If you stay in the echo chamber, you are still a loser. Just a loser with a vocabulary of red pill terms. He insists you have to avoid that echo chamber at all costs.
And the author's proposed solution for avoiding that trap is seeking out real, tangible mentorship.
A man who wants to rebuild must actively seek out other men who have successfully navigated the exact system that is trying to crush him.
He needs to find men who took the massive hit in family court, survived the emotional devastation, strategically rebuilt their wealth, reclaimed their physical health, and reestablished their masculine frame.
The book concludes that only by submitting to the guidance of those who have successfully charted a course through this highly hostile, female-dominated world can a younger or newly divorced man hope to rebuild his own life and actually thrive, rather than merely survive.
We have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today.
From the evolutionary biology of dual mating strategies and the intricacies of shit tests, to the historical realities of paterfamilias and the modern bias of the family court system, it is an incredibly dense analytical framework to process.
It absolutely is. And before we officially sign off, I want to leave you with a final extrapolative thought to mull over, one that builds upon the foundational ideas we've explored today.
What's the thought?
If we accept the premise that evolutionary biology dictates that men are primarily driven to build, protect, and provide resources in exchange for societal respect and guaranteed family structure, a massive question looms over the future.
Okay.
What happens to the physical infrastructure, the economic engine, and the technological advancement of an entire civilization if an entire generation of men universally decides to simply opt out?
That's a terrifying thought.
If the legal, financial, and social risks of participating in marriage in traditional society are deemed by the collective male consciousness to be simply too high, and men en masse decide to go their own way, pulling their labor and innovation out of the system, will society eventually face an infrastructural collapse?
Wow.
Or will society be forced, out of sheer existential survival, to drastically renegotiate the gender contract and offer men a better deal? It is a profound, slightly terrifying question that the modern world may be forced to answer much sooner than it thinks.
That is an incredibly heavy, fascinating thought to leave on. Listener, if you found this deep dive into the male survival manual incisive, and if you realize you need to fully master the rules of this system before you become a casualty of it, you absolutely must read the full text for yourself.
You have to read it.
I urge you to go buy Marriage Trap by Conrad Riker right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. And make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to stay updated on his ongoing research and writing.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Please take a second right now to like this video, subscribe to our channel so we can keep producing this level of analysis, and as always, stay curious. We will see you on the next deep dive.